When you are doing your family history, we all hit brick walls, and we wonder, after you've done census and vital records, what's left? Where can I go? And that's what I dove into the end of April with a lengthy handout. And I didn't cover every single topic in my presentation, or it would have gone on for several hours more. But this is a continuation. It's really a mixed bag. And I have a few pages here, the same as you do, and they're not in any specific order, so hang on. Continuing from the military records in April, I didn't talk much about it because the military records with all of the branches become so complex. If you want military research, either buy this book or come ask him, because it's donated to the library permanently, and you can read through it, and it's valuable. One source that is not in your handout in either one, and I only thought of this when I was driving to Montana, and it happens to be Social Security records. And they started roughly 1935 with deaths. You can find the Social Security Death Index online in numerous places, and some are updated more than others. But in addition to that, what no one tells you is that the Social Security records are partially open to the public, more than just the death information and place. You will need to contact a Social Security office. On the telephone would be great, as opposed to anything online. And you need to have a specific person that you are after, a specific reason. If you are looking for the death of a spouse or a next of kin, perhaps a son or a married daughter, and you don't know where they lived, or even if the person is alive, you can contact Social Security, and if both spouses are deceased, then the information is open to the public. If they have a son, and the son Social Security knows is still alive, they will not give you information about him, but they might be able to tell you willingly where he lives, other details about the couple who had died. They will not give you financial information, no matter how old it happens to be. That's only between Social Security and the one individual. But they can give you places where the individual worked, the dates, information such as that. And it's not a common source, and Social Security is always short-staffed and behind. But if you ask, make an appointment, then many of the people who work for Social Security even now work out of their homes before COVID. And you need to be high up in Social Security to do it, but if you have specific reasons, they can solve your problem. I talked about names and name changes in April as well, and I want to emphasize again that if you can't find someone, especially if you are an immigrant, there is a strong possibility the person came up with a new name. It could be shortened, it could be anglicized, it could be pulled out of a hat. If you were on the East Coast, I have been told that Italians were incredibly faithful about going to court and legally changing their name, not just doing it when you were on the train coming from New York to Butte. I had one really interesting client who was a Swede in southwestern Iowa, and his name was Wigstone. And I had done a lot of Swedish research by that time, and I said, I've never heard of such a surname as Wigstone. And he said, well, start researching my history and see if you can find the origin. And when it comes to research, I'm not one to play games. I want to get right to the point as fast as possible. It saves my time and it saves the client money because he's paying me by the hour. Well, I researched and a generation back further than the immigrants, and Wigstone never appeared. And I was in Iowa, and I met Jim Wigstone in person. There's another Jim. And I went to his house and sat down, and he said, I'll tell you the story. And the immigrant already had the younger generation living in Iowa, and he had been widowed in Sweden, and so he was coming to join the children and grandchildren in Iowa. And he was in the railroad yard in Chicago, and there was a freight train going by, and the side of the freight train said Wigstone Soap. And the man says, oh, I like that for an American name, and it stuck. And he didn't go to court to do it. So you had to know his story or you would never ever prove it. I mentioned the census records very briefly in April, and I'm only going to do it, but I want to add to what you may not know about the census indexes. There are multiple indexes that were created at the time in the 70s and since when the federal government began to release the 1790 census, and then rapidly every 10 years after, up to the 72-year privacy law. There was a man named Ronald Vern Jackson who lived in Salt Lake, and he hired a few people and giant computers that were as big as you can imagine the size of them at the time. And they had them in their homes, and he would give them a microfilm, and they would go through an index. And he was selling large numbers of hard copies, starting with the 1790 census and coming forward beyond 1850. And he hired incompetent people, and his book indexes are garbage. The full set exists at the Family History Library in Salt Lake, and many county libraries bought at least their relevant states or neighboring states. And he says on the front page, if you find any errors in my indexes, please contact me. And the man misspelled his own name. There is what is called the Soundex Index, and that was established by the federal government when Social Security was in the planning stages. And the federal government chose the 1880 census, and they did not include everyone. It was only if the couple or individual had a child who was 10 years of age or under, because the government needed to create statistics for how many people were going to be paid when Social Security began. And the Soundex Index you can see on the front page of your handout, and it was a phonetic index. You cross out the vowels and then the W's and a couple other letters, and you need to create a code number starting with the first letter of the surname and then a 3-digit number afterward. So C, G, J, K, Q, S, X, and Z sound somewhat similar. And with names being often misspelled or handwriting being poor and the indexer can't read it, if you use a Soundex Index, you have a really good chance of being able to find someone. These were originally on 16mm microfilm in the Family History Library. They have been digitized recently and they're now online. You can check them. And so if you can't find a person in the census records, go online to the Family History Library and check these Soundexes, and there's a good chance that you can find the person or family in question. The state of Michigan many years ago started using the Soundex for the first portion of the driver's license number. And when my family was in business and I was running the office and people came in from Michigan, sometimes I played a game with them. And I said, I'll bet you $1 that I can tell you the beginning of your driver's license number. And I never ever had a person who believed me. And they told me their name, and I had the Soundex codes all in my mind up here so I could come up with the beginning of their driver's license.
Huh.
That's pretty good.
And that was fun, and I never told them how I happened to know this. I just said I was a mind reader. When it comes to vital records, this is in your handout too, and whether you want state records or county birth, marriage, and death records, sometimes the county even keeps individual burial records. You need to be aware of what year they begin for your area so that you don't overlook them. Butte is one of the few exceptions that the city has kept birth and death records in addition to the county and the state. In some cases, these more local collections predate the state and the county. Massachusetts has what they classify as civil vital records from the 1600s. Actually, they were town records, and in the rest of the country outside of New England, the term township is often used. If you look at the list on the next page, you can see Illinois first, and if you have Illinois research, you need to be aware that the city of Chicago, which basically covers all of Cook County, has its own records and its own index, and the rest of Illinois is all in one collection. Montana starts in 1907, and you can see that's long after Butte began keeping the city birth and death records.
But you should note in Montana, or at least in Silver Bow County, they didn't require births to be registered until 1960. So
1960?
So from 1907 to 1960, they would pay the doctors, I don't know, a nickel a name or a quarter a name in order to get them registered. So if you had a home birth, you might not have registered, it might not be registered officially. So you'd have to go to the school census records. So.
Okay, thanks. I didn't even know.
Yeah, but that is a note. So, yeah, there are a lot of births missing before 1960. That's why you have delayed birth certificates. So, which you're going to talk about
Yeah.
soon. Yeah.
We are going to talk about delayed birth certificates right now, because for any other reason, before Social Security, a lot of people, the infants were born at home with a midwife, and the births were never registered at all, but all of a sudden, when it comes time to registering for Social Security in the 30s, 40s, 50s, at whatever point, perhaps when you were getting ready to retire, you needed proof. And so if you had a sister, brother, neighbor, you needed at least 2 witnesses to testify they knew you and they knew when you were born, and these were turned in. And so you get all kinds of extra information and more people, relatives or friends, who knew about you and about the family, and they testify. So the delayed birth certificates are always kept in separate ledgers from the originals. And you end up with extra information. So if anyone in your family falls into that category, go for it, because you don't know what you're going to find.
Usually the 3 sources are school census record. The school will certify that this child is this old and was registered with this birth date. Insurance records, that the parent took out a life insurance and the beneficiaries for the children who were born on these dates. And, then there might be maybe family Bible or, something else, one more certification in there. Sometimes it's even the doctor, same doctor in town. Yeah, I was present at this birth.
The school census records, as far as I know, only exist in Montana and Wyoming.
Really?
Those are the only 2 states I've ever found.
Huh.
But in Wyoming, when I had been at the state archives, people have called up and come in person, and they wanted an official birth certificate, and they just go to the school records and they create the official birth certificate for that. If you look at New York for vital records, the state of New York, being a major state, never began vital registration until 1880, which is really sad when you're
Really
doing-
late.
It's pretty late.
Yeah.
Most of the Midwest started in 1867, but the 5 boroughs each acted independently and started the birth and deaths on their own. Pennsylvania, being a major state, did not start until 1906. Utah created the law of civil vital registration upon statehood in January of 1896, and it was the mid-1920s before the southern Utah counties had even tried to keep birth and death records. And when Schofield or Winter Quarters mine blew up on May Day 1900, and there were 200 miners killed almost instantly, not one of them has a death certificate. We could just mention civil registration abroad, and many countries were far ahead of the US because we still have no national civil registration for anything. Belgium started in 1895, and that was, of course, when the royalty changed. Croatia is a new country, but they started vital registration in 1946. Finland started incompletely in 1968. If you were a member of the Lutheran Church or the Orthodox Church or one of the other smaller denominations, Methodist or Baptist, they were in charge to the present day of keeping registration. So you had to officially not be a member of any church before you could get a civil birth certificate. Sweden started in 1860, and it was comprehensive to the present day. Under immigration laws, I touched on this topic in April as well, and what I have here is just simply a transcript of immigration laws which was provided by the National Archives. And you can read that at home, and it becomes somewhat complicated to understand and grasp. Along with immigration records, I found a new source a couple months ago that surprised me. And if you're in Montana, there's a good chance that several of you might fall into the category of these records. Because other than the ports on the East Coast and West Coast, if you were on a grain ship or an ore ship traveling through the Great Lakes, perhaps from Detroit, and you were going up through Lake Huron and then into Lake Superior, can you believe that there were immigration records in Minnesota, and even as far away as Winnipeg had immigration records for ships? The Rainy River begins in Lake Superior, and it flows northerly 137 miles into Lake of the Woods. It has been a major shipping line between the US and Canada. The river is much of the boundary between the two countries. And they had not only the freight crew, but also just paying passengers that traveled on these ships. And they were recorded, and you can see several lists from around 1900 to 1952, 1956. Even Duluth was the port that kept immigration records, probably the largest. So you have reference there. These are online through the Family History Library. There have been some published immigration records, and there is a collection called Germans to America. I think that's the name of the title. There are many volumes, and I don't have a reference here, but they're very accurately done. There's a series called Italians to America from 1880 to 1904, and I had met Bill Philby, who was the compiler, with 28 large volumes. So if you have Italian ancestry you're looking for, during that time it's going to be very easy to find the extended family, even if you already know the direct line. Now we come to the World WPA from 1935 to 1943, originally called the Works Progress Administration, And at some point later on, it was changed to Work Projects Administration. This was also President Roosevelt's New Deal, and the country was deep in the Depression by that time, and he wanted to give the Americans some income. It was supposed to be only temporary and part-time work. It was not going to be full income to support a family, but to keep people from starving to death. And it worked really well. Initially in 1935, there was $4.9 billion appropriated to jumpstart and rescue the country from the depths of the Deep Depression. And it worked. My great-grandfather, Stephanus, lived in Ontonagon County, Michigan, in the western end of the Upper Peninsula, in the middle of nowhere, and at the end of the road at the top of a gorge. And he was in his mid-60s, and he managed to get a job with the WPA, and I think he worked 3 or 4 days per month. It was not every day. But even though he signed up for it, there were 2 sons at home at the end of the family, and they took turns going to work in his place. The government didn't care as long as someone showed up to fill the slot. And that gave work. They must have taken turns rotating which son went on which day. And a lot of what they were doing there was heavy road construction. And so by the time you're short and stocky and 65, the sons did a much better job. And I had looked online for some books to buy, and these are some examples of the Historical Records Survey. And generally, each county had one of these produced. And I'm going to leave these up here on the counter. You can come see them afterward. But the topics are numerous. These people visited churches, they checked on hospitals and any school records and all kinds of county court records. They listed what existed at the time with the years and the location. And it's really quite incredible, and it's a great tool. I don't know, there isn't a comprehensive one that corresponds to this. Kim has another volume, but it's basically records, either financial records, farming records, other than people's names. And if you go through the examples I've got here, they're going to include lots of sources for people. And of course, these are outdated, but if they existed in the 1940s somewhere, they probably still exist today, certainly the court records. And you probably will get some new ideas for new sources. There was another one that was just for federal sources, and you can look at that too. I'm glad I didn't pay a lot of money for it because it's not worth anything to me. But it tells, once again, about land and farming and government agencies, but very few individual people, which you and I want. The Family History Library does have some of these, so you might check their catalog first. Even if you don't have access to them, at least it will give you the information that the book exists and you can find a copy somewhere, perhaps interlibrary loan. And again, if you are looking for one of these, call the county library, the Carnegie Library, City Public Library, and ask for a reference librarian, and then ask if that person is aware of these books in their collection. And since Kim works in a library part-time, you know, you have a resource person right here in your midst.
Call me on Thursdays. I'll refer you back to the archives. All we have is city directories at the public library because we have here.
Is there such a thing as a catalog of public libraries?
Oh, like a listing of public
Yeah, in one
libraries?
big thick volume?
Probably not, but you could probably go, there's probably like the American Library Association or something, and it would probably list member libraries. Almost every town, at least every county seat, is going to have a public library.
Usually you can find them online, but once in a
Yeah.
while they have some strange addition to
Yeah.
the name and you might accidentally overlook them.
Yeah, and then of course you can look up Hearst Free Libraries and find out where all of those are, one of which we have in Anaconda. And you can look up Carnegie Libraries, which are different. Obviously Hearst funded the Hearst Libraries and Carnegie funded the Carnegie Libraries. So our library was actually funded by Charles Larrabee, who was made his money here in Butte. So.
Lots of millionaires. If you need several of these historical record survey books within one state, perhaps you could start by checking with the state library or state historical society, because their collection may have more than any one other single source. Throughout the US and Canada, between 1880 and roughly 1920, many of the counties produced county histories, starting with the origin of the white settlers up to the present day. The books were published. And the county libraries, family history libraries, state libraries have large collections. The province of Saskatchewan went wild, and I don't know who promoted it, but every county seems to have massive volumes about their history and lots of individuals and families. So you might really hit the jackpot in some of these. Silver mining in the West. This is an interesting topic, especially if we're dealing with diseases such as plummeism. It's also known as lead poisoning. And wherever you have a silver mine, you automatically have a certain content of lead within the ore. And I'm not sure how you get it. It has something to do with water. If you end up drinking it or washing with this water that is contaminated with lead.
You have to ingest it.
Okay. But over the course of time, you end up drinking somewhere because it's going to be in the area. And if you have copper mines and zinc mines also in the area, that further complicates plummeism. And it has an atomic number of 82. There are 2 hospitals in Salt Lake, St. Mark's and Holy Cross, that is Roman Catholic. And they opened around 1872. And some years ago, a man showed up at the Marriott Library in the special collections of the University of Utah, and he had several volumes, and they were up to about 1920. And I started reading them. They had line entries, and the information was great. You had the patient's name and age and address, and each one included a next of kin, which could be the parents in the old country, a brother in Leadville. You don't know. But under the reason for treatment, plummeism was exceedingly common. And one of the hospitals kept the patient for 5 to 7 days, and then he was released. And the other hospital kept the patient for 10 to 14 days before being released. And I've asked a lot of people if they have any idea what the treatment at the time was, maybe up to 1920 or 1930, when more modern medications and remedies came in. Nobody knows, but when you had the miners being released in a week or under, they often returned 3 or 4 times in a relatively short period of time, and they died. The ones who had treatment for longer periods of time, in many cases, never came back at all. Maybe they left the occupation. But there were very few deaths. So if anyone can come up with what the treatment was, please contact me. There was a state mine inspector named Robin McCullough a number of years ago, and I happened to meet the man several times. And he knew about plumbism, but he didn't know the treatment. And he made a connection between Montana mining and Utah mining. And he said, if you are in a silver mine in Utah, such as Park City, or in Park City, that the lead content was 3 times higher than in Montana in general, which meant that the lead miners in Utah had their lives and health at greater risk than in Montana. Geography has always been a fascination of me from my early childhood. And there is a 1903 Cram's Atlas of the World that is a recent donation to the archives here. And you can see it's a bit oversized and heavy, and the pages open up. Right to the middle is one huge colored map. They're very interesting. And each individual state has a page as well. The railroads are noted in the atlas. And being the age it is, and pre-World War I, especially for Butens who have Central and Southern European ancestry, the countries are listed in this atlas as they were at the time your immigrant ancestors came to Butte.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have the countries after the 1970s, the boundaries have changed so drastically. Yugoslavia no longer even exists, even though it hosted the Sarajevo Olympics in 1976, the country is out of business. And Croatia is a very strangely shaped country, but you look at the topography of the land and you can see how it came to be. And instead of playing video games, I only have one that I play periodically, and it goes very quickly, called Marbles. But there is a Cetera, Seterra, map quiz game online. And in the evening when I'm wearing down and I just want entertainment, but I want to learn something, I click onto this Cetera map quiz, and it has 200 or 300 or 400 options for playing a game, and you get a map of the continent that you are in, a map of the country you want, and then it gives you a list of all of the places at the top of the screen, and there is a clock in the upper left-hand corner. You can either play it over and over and try to beat your time, or just ignore the clock and have fun playing the game and try to improve your geography. And the first night when I was playing, I brought up Europe, and I thought, this is going to be a cinch. And I'll tell you, I was not as smart as I thought I was. But I played it over and over, and lo and behold, I think I can master it 100% in under 1 minute. And you have to be really good to do that. Then you can click on capitals or major cities in the world and pick a continent or pick the entire world. There are endless options for the United States and individual states. And it will give you names of cities, and then you have to figure out which state is this in. And sometimes you have multiple states with the same name, and they usually avoid those. Or else they give you a little extra hint. And sometimes they're back in the days of immigration, when immigration was high and going from east to the west coast and settling. And I find these fun, so please give it a try.
What's the name of that again?
Cetera map quiz. It's under geography in your handout.
It's listed here in the thing. Can I add something to your geography?
Oh, of course.
As far as atlases, usually I'll try to collect them as they come in to represent, like you said, years that they would have been here. So we didn't have 1903. It's a great year to have. Try to do it like before war and after war. So I don't know if I have them all, I forget, but I know I have like like the interwar period, and then post-World War II, and then Cold War era, and probably a new one too. But yeah, I do try to collect several just so people can look at those. And, you know, for reference as to what the old country was called, you know, when their family came. The other thing that we have, and I have it saved on my computer, is a direct link to download free USGS maps, which I think the USGS started mapping in 1903. I might be wrong. Earlier than that, 1870 or 1896. So you can click anywhere. I always click on Montana, of course, so I'll look like Madison County, Montana. It'll have the USGS maps, but it has the historic maps going all back. So sometimes you'll look at the map and you'll go, oh, it says cabin there. And so you could take that, figure out where it is, and you could probably find out if that was your relative's cabin or something. So, so that's very handy as well, finding the USGS maps, and they're free downloads. So
Yeah, come up and have a
that's
look
awesome.
at the atlas, and then since it's in the library, or the archives here permanently, you can always come and get copies made.
And just to note, I did find some mistakes on there. Whoever made it mislabeled the Tobacco Root Mountains. They put the tobacco roots down south, and they named the tobacco roots, I think the Snowcrest or the South Boulder, I forget what they called it. And yeah, they had a couple little place names wrong in there that I went, that's odd.
Well, you know Montana well, but I wonder with subsequent
Yeah.
publications that they had corrected the error.
Yeah, that's what you wonder, and how many other mistakes were. I mean, I know where the tobacco roots are, and even it had me questioning. So I looked at the USGS for the same year.
Yeah.
Went, nope, there they are. Says tobacco roots.
This is a good place to start.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely.
Newspapers online, you can find these in many different places. Some are free. Of the London Times from 1790 to fairly current is online for free in a couple of places. And it's worthwhile if you have anyone who was a sailor. The London Times was very good about being international with the names of ships, the names of captains. When shipping was not year-round, and if you were in the northern countries with no icebreakers, you had to harbor the ship for the winter in the Mediterranean or in the Florida coast. And it's amazing what the London Times will turn up, because they had contacts all over the world. Queen Victoria, and even before her, were so exceedingly international. And Queen Victoria ruled a quarter of the world. And so to have all of this information coming in, the London Times was very happy to publish it, and I'm sure people read it. And they never listed countries, they would only issue ports. And so how many of you know where Sebastopol happens to be? Every Brit automatically knew where it was, and all of the other Mediterranean ports and worldwide. So that's a great tool. Some of the newspapers charge small fees. You can sign up for a year, or even 3 months or 6 months if you have very limited searches, but you want answers now. It's worth paying it. I've never had a problem with anything being handled improperly. I mentioned this in April, but I'll mention it again. But when you have search engines for newspapers, and being in Butte once again, you have very uncommon surnames. Slavic, all kinds of Russian, Croatian, endless international names. And if you happen to be a Finn or Welsh, some of the surnames are this long. And many of the newspaper columns were very narrow. And so you have a portion of a word on one line with a crooked dash, and then continued on the next line. You need to be aware that in very few cases your search engine is not going to pick these up. So you need to try and perhaps shorten the surname to the first 4 or 5 letters. If you don't find what you want, you shorten it and then try again, or other combinations of these strange surnames, which in England would send a person into shock. Societies and organizations. These are endless, and a lot of the nationalities had their own. Butte and many communities in Montana have a very active German society, and you can find lots of entries to them in the newspapers here online. I don't know if records exist for anything like that, but it might be worth trying to check that out and see how recently the organization for your ethnic group existed. If you are in the Masonic Lodge, it's a secret society, mostly secret, but when the man or the woman joined Job's Daughters, there were pre-printed lengthy forms, and everything had to be completely filled out before the man could be admitted to the lodge. And there was a lot of family history other than birthplaces there, but also parents' names, sometimes siblings, and where the man had worked, what type of job, and years covered. And I would hope these would be updated periodically. If you have a friend who is in the Masons, that person may be able to get some information out. And on occasion, if you either call or send a letter, I have seen where they will give out specific information. They will not copy the document, photocopy the documents, but they will often provide the missing pieces of information that you're after. Then we come to the Daughters of the American Revolution, the DAR. These sweet little old ladies who wore pink dresses with lots of lace and high-heeled shoes and indexed records were not completely perfect. It was a racist society for years and years and decades. Created in 1890 in Washington, D.C., this is a great location for a DAR. However, the membership was for white females only, no matter what your pedigree chart said. In the early days, they were very lax at requiring documentation, and so some of their information that they have is inaccurate. And these ladies, over the many decades, produced large numbers of individual volumes, and they had applicant or membership numbers on the spine. And then there's a master index to just names of the women who belong to the DAR, and another index for the names of the Revolutionary War soldiers with the application number. And I know 30 years ago in Salt Lake, they had a bookcase that was completely filled with these volumes. So if you have ancestry going back to the 1700s, they're always worth checking.
I think we have some of those volumes. We have some sort of volumes from the DAR. I haven't looked at them, but they're downstairs.
Well, at least
it'd be nice
show
to
you these, and you could get an idea
Yeah.
of what the
Yeah.
collection holds.
Yeah.
But there was a famous, worldwide famous black female singer named Miriam Anderson. She was a very good friend of my Finnish friend, John Sibelius, and they had been in each other's homes frequently, and they always sent Christmas gifts. And Eleanor Roosevelt joined the DAR on numerous lines because she has lots of Revolutionary War ancestry. And in the 1930s, Miriam Anderson was coming to Washington, D.C., and she was supposed to be giving a lengthy performance at Constitution Hall, and somehow the DAR canceled the event because she was the wrong color. Eleanor Roosevelt withdrew her membership from the DAR and said that she could not belong to such an organization. So to replace it, Miriam Anderson was taken to the Lincoln Memorial, stood in front of a live crowd of 75,000 people and sang. And at the same time, there were millions of Americans who turned on the radio when they listened to her. So what the little sweet little DAR ladies had tried to do completely backfired. The Sons of the American Revolution began on the 100th anniversary of the presidency of George Washington in 1889, and they're usually called the SAR, and they're not as large of an organization as the DAR, but they have a lot of information too and are always out there to help people searching. The Immigration History Research Center, called the IHRC, is at the University of Minnesota in Minneapolis, established in 1963, and I've been there many times. It's a fantastic place. And people in Butte need to be well aware because they highlighted at least 20 nationalities who are up on the Iron Range. And so you've got the connection between Butte and the Iron Range with the same ethnic groups. People went back and forth between the two. And if you get really stuck, contact them. The staff over the years that I have known people there have been incredibly friendly, and they hire a variety of people, not only for their background, but who speak multiple languages. So if you need translation, that's one place that you can try to get help. And when you come to a brick wall, give them a call and ask what their collections contain, if they have anything that would pertain to your needs and ancestry. And you'll probably get a hit. And their location is absolutely incredible because I was in the old location and the new one, which is just above the river, and it's built into a rock cliff that has 8 to 10 levels in it. So it's completely waterproof and it's fireproof and it's all climate controlled, same as the vaults right behind you here. And their Italian collection, I believe, is the largest, but they have Finns and they have Southern Europeans, and they're a great fit with Butte. The other organization was called the Minnesota Discovery Center, and it's now called the Iron Range Research Center, and they have an archives building that's incredible, not only with documents from all over Minnesota, but they have a great book collection that's grouped by nationality, so you might try giving them a call. And I think that's most of what I have. If you have any questions or so on, you can ask them here, or maybe Kim can stop filming.
Can what?
Push the button.
Very good, Jim.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions or comments that come up